With recent news, the Trump administration has threatened Chairman Jerome Powell with criminal charges for potential fraud for the funds that were allocated for the restoration of historical Federal Reserve buildings. Discourse in relation to the Fed is currently at an all-time high. As a glazer for Jerome, I find the talking points in support of criminal charges and the overall misunderstandings of the Fed and its operations to be quite unfair and unfortunate, because although this is a very boring side of American financial policy, it's important and it affects all of us in our day-to-day lives. Today, I would like to try to cover why is this happening and are we cooked? Disclaimer, I don't have a PhD yet. I don't even have my bachelor's yet, but I am working to get my applied economics degree. That doesn't mean I know more or I should understand more. It just means that, I'm not really understanding why there's a lot of hate towards Jerome currently. And I think people who are, in support of this, I think need to kind of understand that this is not good by any means. And with that, people with that sort of opinion, I respectfully ask you to leave, because I don't appreciate that kind of opinion given your rhetoric, and that kind of discussion doesn't help anyone, have proper communication about our economy. And for the Federal Reserve, it's really important that we have clear communication. If I get anything wrong, please let me know. You can tell me if I got something wrong or misrepresented some words over here. But I'm here to learn, and I would like to get things right as well. To start off, the Fed was created in 1913 as a response to the Panic of 1907. And the Panic of 1907 is when the markets failed to try to control the copper stocks. And because of that, the banks that had loaned these brokers a ton of money lost the money. So the New York Stock Exchange fell around 50%. And when people tried to take out their money because they saw it was dwindling, the banks just didn't have it. So JP Morgan at the time steps in, they resolve the issue, but then the United States recognizes that they need a central authority to manage their monetary policy. They cannot do it alone. And that's what we have today. The Federal Reserve and its current board members, Jerome Powell, Philip Jefferson, Michelle Bowman, Michael Barr, Lisa Cook, Stephen Myron, and Christopher Waller. As you can tell already, people who tell you that Jerome Powell is the sole reason why we cut or lower interest rates is already a little off, because there are 6 other people either telling him that they agree or disagree with that. Additionally, there are 12 Federal Reserve banks in America, and every 6 weeks, which is approximately 8 times annually, the Federal Reserve Board and the banks meet to discuss their data, and their goal is to achieve maximum employment and stable prices. That's literally written in their mandate. It's mentioned literally everywhere, even in the video that Jerome Powell uses to address the criminal charges. Now, in these discussions and with their data, that's how they decide whether or not they want to cut or raise interest rates. And then the decision is represented by Jerome Powell. Now, on the most bare bones understanding, cutting rates means that you want to boost economic activity and get jobs. Lower interest rate, people are willing to borrow more. People are willing to invest in their companies more or in their businesses more. And that's supposed to bring more jobs, right? So more people are going to be able to buy things. People are going to be able to invest in the company further and get more clients, etc. That's the goal. Increasing rates is trying to reduce inflation or curb it and slow economic growth. Less people are going to be borrowing, right? The amount borrowed each time is going to be less, right? That's the goal. And as you can see, this is why it's important for the Federal Reserve and the US government to be separate. Now, as early as July 31st of 2025, Trump has always poked at Powell for not lowering interest rates fast enough or having a deeper cut. We all know the term too late Powell. Trump's advisors have called for resignations. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that he's calling for a review of the Federal Reserve and that they're not conducting monetary policy that is in the best interest of the American taxpayer. And additionally, with all of this, you have to understand it to an extent. This is most like surface level, what the Fed is dealing with. Their data is slowly being inaccurate, right? Trump fired the commissioner for the BLS because he didn't like the jobs report that came out. And additionally, the government shutdown and the amount of federal employees that were fired all culminated into a period where the Federal Reserve had no idea whether or not, jobs was something that they were supposed to be taking care of, or whether it was the economy that they were supposed to take of, right? The inflation. And with that, less people are managing the data that they're getting, and also less people are actually filling out the forms and surveys that, each of these banks are pushing out to their local areas, etc. So a primary concern is tariffs. Trump, from the start of his campaign, has promised to bring tariffs so that we can bring American manufacturing jobs back.
We'll be putting a tariff on of approximately 100% on chips and semiconductors. But if you're building in the United States of America, there's no charge, even though you're building.
But I think a really common example that everyone knows about is, his crash out central moment with China, when at first he was saying that, China gave us a 67% reciprocal tariff, and then that he wanted to dish out a 34%, which would reach to 100, and then it was 155 because he was super mad at them because they dished out another 100 back to us, and then he went, and then the week after got like an agreement with China and got 55%, and then now I think it's 33%, and that was only within like I think three or 4 weeks. And I understand that the 155 was only a one-time thing, but that was after, a lot of pushback. Now, these tariffs delay a lot of trade, right? I have a friend who's close to me who works in the restaurant industry as, a salesman and the blueprint maker for walk-in boxes, right? And these walk-in boxes use a lot of steel and aluminum because there's no other metal out there that can, store produce, frozen meats, fish, fruits, dairy, cheese, all that, right? But there was a 50%, tariff on these metals, and so a lot of his clients are not, requesting as much products, right? He works with a very popular food restaurant chain that I'm not allowed to name for obvious reasons. In addition to that, his other clients who are just mom and pop shops have higher costs of food. Given the fact that the U.S. does not necessarily grow everything here, right? We don't grow 60% of our fruits and nuts, right? They're imported from, Mexico, South America, Canada. We don't grow it here, right? We grow soybeans, wheat, flour, corn, right? But a lot of that is for our meat industry, right? And if you combine these, increasing food costs and the tariffs on just equipment itself, restaurants are going to be struggling, right? And this is only one part, right? You need to think about like the energy sector, AI, tech, finance, right? Manufacturing. This is just one sector out of so many that the Fed needs to consider. I think you guys should see why, like, oh, yeah, I could see why this is a little bit difficult to decide whether or not you want to cut or raise interest rates. Now let's jump to the present, right? As of this recording, Jerome is being accused of fraud, and that he was using government funds improperly for the renovations on the Federal Reserve's historic buildings because it's old, right? And Trump denies it. He said Trump denied any involvement in the criminal investigation with NBC News, but he says he's not surprised because he hurt a lot of people. I mean, there's barely any correlation there, right? Just because someone has poor monetary policy doesn't mean you should lock them up in jail. Like what kind of logic is that, right? And additionally, Powell's term is up in May. It's not like he's like staying for another like decade. So this is like a very strong attack because maybe Trump is seeing that, the economy is not performing as much as he wanted to, and he's looking for these rate cuts desperately in order to kind of save his perception in the midterms, right? I think this is also why it's happening. Now, if you're wondering, if Powell is gone in May, who's the new guy? Well, according to Polymarket, it's either Kevin Hassett or Kevin Warsh. What a time to be at Kevin, eh? Okay, sorry. Kevin Hassett was on the economic advisor team to Trump in his first term in 2017, and his supporters and donors found it odd that he was on this team in the first place because Kevin Hassett's original position on the economy was that immigration was a big contributor or would help grow overall economic growth. And people were like, why are you here? But eventually, in the New York Times article, he did say that he eventually grew with the Trump policies despite, his brazen attitude. So technically, he is in agreement with Trump, right? So that's why Trump would want him to be the replacement for the Fed chair. Or it could be Kevin Warsh, and he really wants this job. And in the CNBC interview, he was saying like, oh, I think the Fed should not be following the same models as each other, and he wants like less group thinking. Which, to be honest with you, is quite concerning, because what do you mean you want less group thinking? And additionally, he was like, oh, the independence of the Fed is good, but there should be things that the Fed could be doing better that the government is like asking of them, right? I'll show the clip right now.
The president has to sign off on those things. Would you support them? And I guess the biggest question, Kevin, is people are wondering, the next Fed chairman, is he going to be independent? Is he going to say, and I say he because right now the candidates that we're hearing are all men, is he going to be independent? Is he going to do what he thinks is right, despite what the White House may advise or think, what the administration thinks?
So in a word, yes. So I've strongly believed for 20 years, and history tells us that the independent operations in the conduct of monetary policy is essential. But that doesn't mean the Fed is independent in everything else it does. They wandered into climate change, a subject upon which they have no comparative advantage. They wandered into another political area of which they were never assigned, diversity, equity, and inclusion. During the period of the last administration, what did they say to Congress? Spend, spend, spend. So like you, I think they should stay in their lane.
Overall, I think he's one of the first people out of the two so far that, wants the job more, to say the least. But wait, there's another two people, you say? Who could it possibly be? Well, if you looked at the Polymarket page, it's either Rick Reeder or Chris Waller. I'm sorry if I just said your name wrong, Rick. Please don't buy my house. Rick is the CEO of BlackRock. He is the chief investment officer for global fixed income within BlackRock. And ironically, he spent 20 years at the Lehman Brothers. And I think his CNBC interview was a little concerning, if I'm being honest. He just wouldn't comment on anything. But to be fair, at the time, it was publicly announced that, he was being interviewed for the Fed chair position. But I think this is the worst choice for a Fed chair. And the other one is actually one of the guys on the board of the Federal Reserve currently, Christopher Waller. In an interview with, I think, NBC, he believed in the rate cuts, but he said that, we should be cautious with it. We should be slow and make sure that, these cuts are actually working. He believed that the data from the labor market was that it was getting weaker. And this was in combo with the ADP and BLS data. And then he also believed that there was a very clear correlation between, the size of the tariffs and the price of goods. And in a Yale CEO summit, 81% of CEOs who attended that summit said that they wanted Chris Waller to be the next Fed chair and not Kevin Hassett and Kevin Warsh, because CEOs would rather prefer Chris Waller be the next Fed chair because he's more reasonable. He's not a Trump loyalist, as we know so far, I think. And overall, he has like a reasonable, so far, opinion that is not straying too far from a bipartisan independent position. Now, to the real question, finally, are we cooked? In my non-professional opinion, yes, but also no, right? Even if the new Fed chair follows Trump right? He's a Trump loyalist, like Kevin Hassel to Kevin Warsh, right? The tariffs that Trump imposes, plus the lowered value of the dollar that you have when you cut rates, can lead to general public anger, right? Less buying power overall from consumers will not produce the expected economic growth that you are trying to occur when you're cutting rates, right? So even if they cut rates, on paper, realistically, it should not work, right? If the tariffs continue to occur and, we keep on, conducting trade wars with everyone, it'll only get worse, right? Like, it will not matter whether or not the Fed chair is loyal to Trump if the economy is just terrible. In addition, we saw on the board of the Fed that there are 6 other people that are advising him, right? So, these other people are going to tell him like, no, I disagree with this, or, oh, yes, I agree with this. And then additionally, the banks that they meet with are going to say like, no, I disagree with this, or yes, I agree with this, right? So there's a lot of checks and balances in this position. Now, the question is the public, if they do cut rates, is the public willing to admit that, Trump is controlling the rate? And if the economy on paper does get bad, will he get so much backlash that, it's like, okay, fine, we'll raise the rates back to whatever it is today. So I don't have the number tell in my head, but I'll put it on screen right now. But the idea is that, even if they cut rates, you are asking for the dollar to be devalued even further and have less power, right? It's a very strong balance that the Fed needs to find, and just cutting rates like haphazardly is not the answer. And that's it for me. There's a lot that I did not cover, unfortunately. I wanted to cover more, but to be honest with you, news moves way too fast. And I think there was an announcement that Trump said that like publicly on Truth Social that, if the Supreme Court reverses his ruling against tariffs, he's fucked, right? And I think that's very true. If I got anything wrong, which I think I did, please let me know. And if anyone watches this, thank you. If you've been at this point, I really appreciate it. And don't take this as like a word for word, you must speak this. This is like the truth. But this is more or less like a rant, because I'm really sick of watching, people lie to each other on X, the Everything app. And yeah, thank you.